Have you ever been criticized for something that you made? Yeah, we'll see a show of hands. Thanks, Wynn. Yes, that's okay. At least most of us. Okay, keep them up for a second. If you were criticized for something you made before the age of 10, yeah, you can look around. That was most of us again. I'm sorry. So the whole thing's an art project, and I'm not talking about art, or not just art with a capital A. I told Judy I need someone to talk about art, not highfalutin art. That broad category of art that includes everything from Monet to the splatters of paint and primary colors that my son would bring home daily from preschool. The kind of art that just begs to be freed from the confines of our thoughts and skin. The kind of art that's fed by precious moments of daydream, that sometimes requires long days with no plans, and even a certain amount of boredom to come into maturity. And as it's pulled from us into the world in colors, in rhythm, in jokes, in kitchen experiments, in brushstrokes and love notes, it usually has no great goals or ambitions. There's a moral philosopher, ethicist, Dwayne Cady, who his book is Moral Vision, How Everyday Life Shapes Ethical Thinking. And he argues, like many contemporary philosophers, that there's actually very limited role to what we classically think of as reason in how we orient our decision-making, our ethical decision-making, and our lives. He says formal reasoning happens within conceptual frameworks, but it cannot prove or provide those frameworks. So these conceptual frameworks that lie at a deeper layer in us than our intellectual reasoning. Metaphor, he writes, allegory, parable, narrative, and life experience. All these things we might think of as sacred text in our tradition. Metaphor, allegory, parable, narrative, and life experience, they all reveal constructive visions that frame and guide moral reasoning. And so for an example, he says you could distill these down into these big overarching metaphors for life. People sometimes will think of life as a test. You can, I imagine, all of us imagine theologies that conceive of our entire lives as a test that will be judged at some endpoint in time. Or he offers life as a journey, that we're on some journey. This is a common one for us. You use life as a journey. It's about the journey, not about the destination. This was a primary framework for me for a long time, and then I got sick of it. I didn't want to be on a journey anymore. I didn't want the implication of a destination or the forced march. Have you ever put yourself in a forced march, getting through all that needs to get done day in and day out? I used to sign all my newsletters, "With you on the journey, Reverend Marcus." That's sweet. And then I got sick of it. "With you on the schmurney," I started writing. So I went digging when this happened to me, this crisis of faith in my life as a journey, underarching metaphor. I got curious about what I would replace it with, and what I landed on was this idea that the whole thing's an art project. What are we going to make with the materials we've been given? How will we relate to our collaborators, chosen or otherwise? How will we make art in the face of war? How will we make art from the traumas we've inherited or experienced? How will we make art as the climate changes and life on our planet is endangered? I have no idea, but I thought I'd jot down some of my aesthetic principles as a sort of a credo statement. So here it is. I believe in whimsy and wandering. I believe in bearing witness, practicing inaction on the impulse to relieve my discomfort. I believe in layers, in refraction, in the microcosmic reflected in the macrocosmic. I believe in rainbows. I believe in seeing from many angles. The more vantage points, the better. I believe in trusting joy, trusting the yes. I believe in loving the ebb and the flow, the expansion and the contraction. I believe in cherishing brokenness and always seeking an underlying wholeness. I believe surprise is important. I believe messes, wildness, a little crazy is good for you. Sometimes a lot of crazy is necessary. I believe in order in titrated doses when it really feels right. I believe feelings are always there to help. At least they're trying to. I believe what is true at the depths of anything is true at the depths of everything. And I believe in leaving it unfinished. People sometimes talk about that state of consciousness they enter while making art. You know what I'm talking about? This flow state, or I think it's similar to what athletes talk about, being in the zone. Otto Scharmer, the MIT thinker, philosopher who talks about presence and names his work Theory U, I think he's getting at this state when he articulates three voices that are barriers to living in it. The three voices that for me are barriers to making art with the materials of life. The first one, he says, the voice of judgment, which keeps us in black and white thinking. It's all about reducing complexity. Makes day-to-day life easier to manage. We need this voice of judgment to discern, to make choices easily. But when it's overactive, it negates the open mind, he says. So to have open mind, we have to let go, release, relax the voice of judgment. And then he says the second is the voice of cynicism, which is there to protect us, I think, from emotional investment in ideas that could damage our egos, that are threatening. This voice of cynicism where I step back and say, ew, or it can't be possible, things can't really change. This self-protected stance that I have to release in order to live with an open heart. And then he says the voice of fear, this voice of fear that urges us to pursue the safety of the status quo, to keep things stable and normal. This voice of fear that negates what he calls the open will. So we release the voice of cynicism, of judgment, and of fear. We can open our mind, our heart, and our will. And it's that state of open mind, heart, and will that allows us to take anything as an opportunity for art, I believe. And I believe that if we have that state, that open state, that alignment, that seeing with an artist's eye the situation in front of us, which is never ideal. I had one teacher I remember talking about, there's no ideal situation. When we look at the situation we're given with the open mind, heart, and will, then we naturally begin to align with whatever the principles are that underlie everything. And when I think about the principles that underlie everything, I can't help but thinking about God, and I know that that drives some of you crazy. So, just translate me. But I was thinking about Reverend Jay Atkinson, one of our members, who gave a sermon. It was my first Sunday coming checking out church back in August. And he was talking about beauty as the fundamental nature of God through the orientation of process theology. Beauty, God as this lure towards the beautiful. And I remember reading a staunch humanist Unitarian minister who was wrestling with why did Whitehead, who was this thinker who started the field of process theology, why did he need God at all? It was such a rational theory, this systematic idea of how the universe was ordered in Whitehead's. He was a mathematician. Why did he need God at all? And the conclusion this reader made of Whitehead was he needed it to explain novelty. Whatever it is, whether you call it God or something else, there's got to be something that lives in the foundation of being that brings newness into existence. The prophet Isaiah said, "I am about to do a new thing. Now it springs forth. Do you not perceive it?" Something about this attention to newness, to what is being creatively called forth from us. Alice Walker said it like this: "I think it pisses God off if you walk by the color purple in a field somewhere and don't notice it." People think pleasing God is all God cares about, but any fool living in the world can see it always trying to please us back. John, my drama teacher in high school, he had another name for this source because a high school improv class wasn't really one of those places where you talk creatively about what God means. He talked about when we were really kind of going in that flow, in that state, thoroughly warmed up and fully present in the improvisation games, that we would sometimes astonish ourselves. Have you ever astonished yourself with what comes out of your mouth? Those moments when we'd astonish ourselves at the scenes we created, and we would turn to him and demand an explanation. You set this all up. What just happened? Oh, I think the delight John got out of those moments. This knowing grin spread across his face as he solemnly concluded the 13th dimension. That's where that came from. And whether you call it God or the 13th dimension, there is this place, this origin of newness that exists in the nature of reality. I was talking with John about this event we're going to have next week, this installation, because he was curious about why it's an installation. And so I had to explain to him that I'm hoping not to be installed like a piece of software or a new plumbing fixture. My hope is that it will be more like an art installation. My goal with you is to do ministry as if I were your artist in residence, alongside a community of artists. In this ministry with you, my intention is to center my work in being a wonderer, not a solver, a sharer of dilemmas, not the Savior who always knows how to resolve them. And I do think that church is about this grand art project we're all involved in, this art project that is the gap between the world as it is and the world as we know it could be and should be. It's the same gap between the vision of an artistic endeavor and the execution which inevitably falls short. To live in that gap is to be human, to be alive. To live in that gap is to make art. Elaine Scarry writes about this. She's a Harvard professor and aesthetic theorist. And she reminds us in her piece, Beauty and the Pact of Aliveness. She says that the word fair, as in fair play and fair practices, it comes etymologically from the aesthetic word fairness, meaning lovely in countenance or perfection of fit. So it's fair as in beautiful, fair play and fair practices. Both beauty and justice, in her vocabulary, have injury as their opposite term. And she says, in the case of justice, this is literally the case. The second syllable of injury is the same root as injustice, and injury, she says, is the most accurate opposite to beauty. Injury as the opposite to beauty. Leaving ministry off for the first ministry of my career, it was a time of a lot of tumult and change. And the night before we set off on our road trip to travel across the country to New York, I took a walk with the former ministers of this congregation, my mentors with Bill and Barbara, Hamilton Hallway. And the piece of advice they gave in that tumultuous moment was to take time every day to notice something beautiful. And for years afterward, the practice in our family was to end each day by asking one another, what's the most beautiful thing you saw today? And sometimes that beautiful thing, it doesn't fill with joy, but with sorrow, a poignant sorrow of connectedness to life, that pact of aliveness she talks about. Do you know Zachary's Corner down on Derby and Waring in Berkeley? That was sometimes the most beautiful thing I'd seen. For over a decade now, it's been a memorial to a little boy named Zachary who attended the school my son now attends, and who was struck by a car and killed there when he was 5 years old. And for years now, those who loved him have maintained and grown this little corner altar, always bright with art and flowers and notes. At this point, the city street sign at the top of the pole that holds the center of the altar reads, Zachary's Corner. This site of pain and tragedy, of unbearable suffering, becomes also a site of beauty, of remembrance, a rallying point to the cause of pedestrian safety that his parents have devoted themselves to. In a place of brokenness and hurt, people have made an altar to the beauty of life. And this is how it is, to keep living in the face of tragedy, to keep inspiring joy and justice in an imperfect world. A part of us knows that even with the ugliest of materials, there is beauty in the making. Felt this last week worshiping down at the border. There's a church that gets together in Friendship Park, right on the border. Part of the park spans into Tijuana, part on the outskirts of San Diego, and there's a church that gathers there every week to lift up migrants stuck there at the border wall. And the border wall, it's not beautiful, because it is, of course, doing injury to so many who are separated from loved ones across it. But there are artists who are painting on it, who are seeing in between the slats of the wall spirit moving in the air, in the waves, all the way down it goes into the ocean. A place that, even though does injury, is made beautiful each week by a community that cares. Monet, the great impressionist, he famously suffered from cataracts near the end of his life. He struggled with the loss of vision, with the way it changed his painting. Ultimately, his right eye was operated on, and then he was disappointed with the results, so he refused an operation on the left side. And it was a source, I understand, of great sadness and distress for him, but a poet, a contemporary poet, Lisa Moeller, imagined a Monet who found a deeper wisdom in the meaning of the affliction. So this is her poem, Monet Refuses the Operation. Doctor, you say there are no halos around the streetlights in Paris, and what I see is an aberration caused by old age, an affliction. I tell you, it has taken me all my life to arrive at the vision of gas lamps as angels, to soften and blur and finally banish the edges you regret I don't see, to learn that the line I called the horizon does not exist, and sky and water so long apart are the same state of being. 54 years before I could see Rouen Cathedral is built of parallel shafts of sun, and now you want to restore my youthful errors? Fixed notions of top and bottom, the illusion of three-dimensional space, wisteria separate from the bridge it covers? What can I say to you to convince you the Houses of Parliament dissolve night after night to become the fluid dream of the Thames? I will not return to a universe of objects that don't know each other, as if islands were not the lost children of one great continent. The world is flux, and light becomes what it touches, becomes water, lilies on water, above and below water, becomes lilac and mauve and yellow and white and cerulean lamps. Small fists passing sunlight so quickly to one another that it would take long, streaming hair inside my brush to catch it, to paint the speed of light. Our weighted shapes, these verticals, burn to mix with air or change our bones, skin, clothes to gases. Doctor, if you could only see how heaven pulls earth into its arms and how infinitely the heart expands to claim this world. Blue vapor without end. Let us be those artists whose small fists pass sunlight so quickly to one another. You are an artist, a creator, and let's not let your third grade art teacher or anyone else tell you otherwise. Not your third grade art teacher or your childhood choir director or anyone else tell you that what you create does not have a place in this world, does not add to the beauty and value and novelty and wonder of the universe. Let's make art together in the kitchen and the garden, at an intersection, along borders, on hilltops, at the edge of the ocean. Make altars to making, altars to beauty. Renew your spirit by honoring your capacity to create. If in all the things you are already making, rejoice, delight in the gift of creation. And if you have felt more barren, like the ground and trees of winter, let this season of growth and abundance, let wildflowers and greening leaves be your call to create once more. May it be so, and amen.